So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on learning and leading and learning with pride, a revitalized toolkit on supporting 2S LGBTQI plus seniors. And I'm so pleased today that we have Joseph Friedman Burley with us today, and he will be doing the presentation. Just to remind individuals that we are funded through the Ministry for Seniors and Accessibility, and any of the information or opinions expressed today are not that of reflecting of the Ontario government. I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we gather on the traditional territory of a number of First Nations and acknowledge their stewardship of this land throughout the ages. We seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land, one that is based in honor and deep respect. Thank you. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin today. All attendees will be muted for today's session. Our speakers will be visible during the presentation, and we do encourage you to ask questions during the presentation or have comments. You can put those in the chat box. As I mentioned, we have our ASL interpreters with us today, and they will be switching on and off their cameras. So if you're pinning individuals, the ASL 1 or 2, you might want to pin them both or individually as they come up. You can make those images of the speakers larger by dragging the line between the speaker's image and the PowerPoint presentation. We also have our chat box where you can, as I mentioned, you can post comments, or if you see someone that you want to chat with that's a participant they haven't seen in a while, or want to share where you're joining in from today, we'd be more than pleased to find out where you're from. If you have a specific question regarding the toolkit, or if that you want to ask Joseph during the presentation, please do so. Post that in the question and answer box. Makes it easier for us to determine your question so it doesn't get lost in if there's a lot of chat going on in the chat box. We are recording the presentation today. It will be posted on our website tomorrow, along with the PowerPoint presentation, so you can access and download that if you'd like. And we do have an evaluation that only takes a couple minutes. We do appreciate your feedback. If you don't mind completing that, we'd really appreciate your participation in doing so. And just lastly, we do respect everyone's privacy and confidentiality. So if there are personal circumstances or issues that you do want to address, we encourage you to reach out to us via email or phone, and we will be more than happy to discuss situations in privacy and confidentiality, as this is a public forum that individuals are participating in. So you can ask questions anonymously. There is that option as well. But if there is some circumstances in terms of identifying individuals' names that you might be associated in terms of a case scenario, we please just refrain from doing that. We can talk personally offline to help assist you in situations that you may be encountering. For those who are joining us for the first time, just to give you a little bit of background on who we are, Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, our goal really is to make sure that seniors are free from abuse, have a strong voice, feel safe and respected. And we work with many organizations across Ontario and agencies and seniors community groups to deliver education and training. And we also work collaboratively with those agencies to ensure better service coordination to respond and to assist older adults in the community, as well as providing advocacy, promoting the rights and dignity of older adults in Ontario. As I mentioned, we are funded through the Ministry for Seniors and Accessibility, and we are given the mandate to implement Ontario's strategy to combat elder abuse, which started in 2003, and we've been doing so ever since. As I mentioned before, we work under 3 main priorities around education awareness, training of frontline providers, and the coordination of community services. So those 3 pillars really drive the work that we do. However, under each of those pillars, there's many activities and programs and outreach that we do, and it's expanding since the initiation of this strategy in 2003 over the years, and our outreach has grown tremendously. I encourage you to check our website that has these resources and information that gives you more detail. We are a complement of about 8 staff who work with us as a leadership. Due to COVID in the last couple of years, we continue to work on a virtual service delivery model. So we do many webinars as well as our training online currently. And we work, as I mentioned, with our community partners, including elder abuse prevention networks. And we are building a Francophone seniors community network as well. So if you're interested in getting involved, we would encourage you to check out our website under local prevention networks to see if there's a network in your area where you might be able to become involved and reach out to those chairpersons. And as I mentioned, we do a lot of projects and research initiatives as partners on issues related to abuse prevention. Our website has many tools. We are very active on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram currently, and as well as LinkedIn to promote the information that we're doing, sharing tips, warning signs. We're always coming up with new tools and information for individuals. And again, as I mentioned, we can do customized training for individuals. The one thing I just want to point out that as our organization, we do play a key role in providing information and referral to individuals and families and agencies regarding situations. However, we don't case manage as case scenario or case situations. But with our community partners, we're able to connect you with agencies that can support you in the situation that you may be encountering. This is just a sample of some of the resources that we have. And given the topic today, we do have a module that we have developed a while back on elder abuse in our LGBT communities. So that is available online that individuals can download in English and French as well. And just a little context around before we begin talking about this toolkit, because I think just so people understand the definition, and it is the same definition that is in the toolkit, that we use the World Health Organization definition, which is a single repeated act or action occurring within a relationship of trust that causes harm or distress to an older person. So this common definition is used within many organizations across not only Ontario, but in Canada. And this issue is so important, and the topics that we address is that we know that up to 10% of older adults experience some form of abuse. And when you're looking at the population within Ontario or within Canada, that's over, almost 800,000 individuals. And we know that that number is even significantly higher. So when we're looking at those who may be more vulnerable or addressing, just based on research, the needs to address the safety and well-being of all seniors, we participate in many initiatives, and the work that Joseph has been doing on leading and learning with pride. This toolkit is an excellent tool to ensure and support seniors in the LGBT2S community to ensure their safety and well-being is cared for, not only within long-term care homes, retirement homes, and community-wide. So I'm going to allow Joseph to take over and talk about his great toolkit that they've been doing. Do want to mention that our organization was involved in assisting and reviewing the toolkit as well. So Joseph?
Thank you so much, Rayanne, for that warm introduction. And yes, thank you for your ongoing partnership and contributions to this vital, vital resource and our work to disseminate and roll it out as far and wide as we can, which is really the purpose of our presentation today. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this overview and kind of sneak peek into our new revitalized toolkit on supporting 2S LGBTQI+ seniors. That is called Leading and Learning with Pride. So as Rayanne mentioned, my name is Joseph Burley. My pronouns are he and him. I work as a management consultant in the City of Toronto Senior Services and Long-Term Care Division. So our division not only directly operates 10 long-term care homes across Toronto, but also is coordinating and integrating and delivering services to seniors who are dwelling in community and who are opting more and more, as we know, to pursue aging in place. And 2S LGBTQI+ seniors are no exception. So we have ensured that content in this toolkit is relevant to folks across the continuum of senior support. And I will talk more about that in a little bit. So let's get started. So here's what to expect from me today, a brief agenda. First, I want to give you some information on where and how to access our new toolkit. Second, I want to provide some important context and history about where this resource came from and why we redeveloped and released it at this time. We didn't just pull this out of thin air. It has an interesting story that I'd like to share with you. Third, we will provide an overview of the toolkit's content and dive into what each section contains and what you can expect to find in each section of the resource. Then we'll explain a few resources and features of the toolkit to guide your use of it, to inform how you apply the content you're learning about in the toolkit in practice day to day. And last but not least, we will highlight and touch on some next steps that we as a division and a senior services provider are taking to ensure that this resource is meaningfully implemented and again, broadly disseminated to ensure, again, that we are all providing the best care and support possible to queer and trans seniors. This presentation, again, is not a formal kind of training session or workshop, so we're not going to dive really deep into the content of the toolkit this afternoon, but the hope is to build excitement and enthusiasm around this resource and for folks who are in attendance to be proactive a bit, to learn on their own and take time after the session today to interact with the resource. So first and foremost, our new toolkit is now live and freely accessible on the City of Toronto's website. I will post the link to that in the chat right now. You can also scan the QR code on the slide to access it on any devices. And we worked really tirelessly to make sure that this resource was launched just in time for Toronto Pride. So our official launch date was June 23rd, 2022. And another piece I'd like to flag is that we made sure to launch this resource with a bang. So the release of our toolkit was accompanied by an amazing series of Pride celebrations and launch events across our division, including an official launch event held with members of our toolkit working group and senior leadership at the city at Castleview Witchwood Towers, which is our largest long-term care home. But again, celebrations and parades and performances throughout the division to signal to our long-term care residents, our staff, our volunteers, our families, and our communities that this is a resource that we are excited about sharing, that we have the support of leadership in sharing, and to set a precedent about what it really means to lead and learn with pride. So I'll now get started with a bit of context and history about where this resource came from. And to do that, I'll begin with a quote. "Difference is that raw and powerful connection from which our personal power is forged. Without community, there is no liberation, but community must not mean a shedding of our differences, nor the pathetic pretense that these differences do not exist." So this quote from author and activist Audre Lorde really encapsulates the collaborative spirit of the toolkit, and it's really guided our work from the outset. Senior services and long-term care is a division that really celebrates strength and unity and difference, and has worked to ensure that a diverse kind of chorus of voices have meaningfully informed the revitalization of our toolkit. And I would be remiss if not to acknowledge all of those voices and players on this slide. So as you can see in our engagement model, this is a real team effort. It was a real collaborative effort. We would be nowhere without the unwavering support and commitment and contribution of our Toolkit working group. This is a community collective of lived experience advisors, and I see Leslie has joined us today. Leslie is a very prominent player on that working group who we are very much indebted to. So thanks, Leslie, for joining. That group also includes allied service providers and advocates. And this group met bi-weekly, regularly from September to April 2021 to 2022 to chip away at this resource and redevelop it piece by piece. We also held a series of internal consultations in the division with our residents, families, and staff, and you'll actually see woven throughout the toolkit direct quotes and stories from these folks. Finally, we engaged an expert review panel to tie this resource together and provide leadership and subject matter expertise from a variety of different perspectives. Rayanne and Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario was very much involved in that stage and really pivotal in bringing this resource together and getting it ready for launch and release. So just one more huge thank you to all of these folks represented on this slide for bringing this resource to fruition and continuing to push us to meaningfully implement and roll this resource out. But now I'd like to talk about where it all came from. So the toolkit actually has a long and rich history. The original toolkit actually dates all the way back to 2004, when the City of Toronto Senior Services and Long-Term Care Division, which was at the time called Long-Term Care Homes and Services, became one of the first providers in North America to shift towards a model of care that really worked to address the needs and challenges of 2S LGBTQI+ seniors. And then in 2008, to kind of promote that model division-wide, we released the first iteration of this resource. So it's actually about 14 years old in the grander scheme of things. A couple years later in 2017, we refreshed the resource. That may be the version of this toolkit that you are most familiar with. At that time, and I wasn't with the division then, but what I've come to understand is the goal there was to try and share what we'd learned about delivering sensitive care to queer and trans seniors, specifically across the city's 10 long-term care homes and community programs. And if you've interacted with that resource, it's quite clear as well that the focus was more narrow and very much internal on what the city was doing. And so there wasn't as much engagement and consultation with community, and that's something that we really wanted to change this time around. The other thing that's important to flag is that, in the 5 years since the release of the 2017 toolkit, we can all acknowledge that a lot has changed. Language, research, best practices, models relevant to the care of queer and trans seniors have all significantly advanced and evolved. And that's why in 2022, we knew that it was time to revitalize this resource and to do so with close collaboration of communities. We also undertook this revitalization and the redevelopment of this toolkit to advance a particular recommendation in the Toronto Seniors Strategy. For those of you who aren't familiar, this is a citywide strategy that was unanimously adopted by Council in 2018. It contains within it 27 high impact recommendations to push Toronto and advance Toronto towards a city that is more age inclusive and age equitable. And those recommendations are categorized into these kind of different service areas. So there are some about health and housing, transportation, social support, etc. And recommendation 22 in that strategy stems from this understanding that the current generation of 2S LGBTQI+ seniors have experienced decades, if not a lifetime, of discrimination due to their sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. And cumulative exposure to those forces, to that kind of discrimination, can really impact our experiences and challenges as we age. And so in response, recommendation 22 in the Toronto Seniors Strategy actually directs the City of Toronto to work with community partners to raise awareness and educate against homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia affecting seniors. And it's really our hope that the revitalized toolkit that we're talking about today can do exactly that. So with a bit more context and understanding of the history here, let's jump into the overview of content. Let's give you a sense of really what's in this resource and how you can use it to better serve and support and respond to the needs of 2S LGBTQI+ senior communities. When we sat down with our working group to revitalize the toolkit, one of the first conversations we had was, who is this resource going to be for? And as I mentioned in the past, the 2017 version especially is very narrow in its audience, directed specifically towards City of Toronto long-term care providers. But we blew that wide open for this iteration of the toolkit. And what I'd like to say in terms of audience is that this resource is for you. It is intended for any and all service providers, caregivers, and care partners working across the continuum or spectrum of support to better serve 2S LGBTQI+ seniors. Again, content in this toolkit is much broader than its predecessors. Wherever you are providing care and support to queer and trans seniors, whether that's home care, healthcare, social support, community agencies, retirement, long-term care homes, in your household as an informal caregiver, there is something in this resource for you to take away so that you are providing the best support possible to the 2S LGBTQI+ seniors in your life. The next really important conversation we held with our working group was about determining the kind of central purpose or guiding value for this toolkit. You know, what was this all going to be about? And after many, many conversations, what we arrived at is that this toolkit was all about advancing respectful, inclusive, and affirming care. And I think we hear those words kind of thrown around pretty casually in conversations and discourse about, you know, 2S LGBTQI+ care and support. And we did not want to do that. We wanted to drill down with our working group to really define and operationalize what it means for care to be respectful, inclusive, and affirming. And what it means for us, and we developed this in close consultation with our working group, is that respect is a foundation. It's the foundation of all of this. It means really at a base level, considering the experiences of 2S LGBTQI+ seniors and upholding their fundamental rights to dignity and freedom from discrimination. So we made sure to reference the foundational documents that enshrine those rights, things like the Ontario Human Rights Code. For City of Toronto services, there's a human rights and anti-harassment and discrimination policy that we reference. And in the long-term care setting, the Ontario Residents' Bill of Rights. There are legal documents that guarantee that we must provide care and support to queer and trans seniors that is free from discrimination. And that's where we started. But we didn't stop there. We wanted to go a level up towards inclusion, which means providing equitable access to resources and opportunities for queer and trans seniors. If you are working in an organization that runs seniors programming, have you ever taken a step back and thought, are there any barriers, explicit or implicit or inadvertent, that are diminishing access for queer and trans seniors to this program? Are our intake forms binary when we ask about gender? If we're doing celebrations for Valentine's Day, do those acknowledge and celebrate and recognize same-sex and queer couples? There are all of these different considerations that need to be brought to the fore when providing care that is inclusive and providing services that are inclusive for seniors. And finally, the ultimate level that we want to get to is one of affirmation, at which 2S LGBTQI+ seniors are not only respected and included, but their lived experiences and their participation are actively encouraged, celebrated, and supported. And this is where the importance of things like pride celebrations come in. These are amazing opportunities for organizations to show that we see queer and trans seniors and that we celebrate their identities and that we are taking steps to provide the best care and support possible. But what does it really, really mean for care to be respectful, inclusive, and affirming? And what does it really look like for providers and caregivers to embody this kind of value day to day? So this is what we've come up with to advance respectful, inclusive, and affirming care for queer and trans seniors. It's a model that focuses at two levels. First, on the level of individual service providers, and second, at the level of entire organizations, as we know that both have a key part to play in better supporting 2S LGBTQI+ seniors. So, as such, we divided the toolkit into two big sections, where section 1 focuses on building individual knowledge and skills, and section 2 focuses a level up on building organizational capacity with specific recommendations for staff and senior leadership. And I'm now going to go into a little bit more detail about what each of these sections includes. So here's our overview of section 1. As I mentioned, this section provides the kind of foundational knowledge necessary to support queer and trans seniors. And in terms of learning objectives, this section specifically is going to do 3 things. It's going to familiarize you with important language and terminology relevant to the care of queer and trans seniors. So all of the terms and concepts and initialisms and acronyms that we use when talking about and interacting with these communities, there's just a very comprehensive glossary right at the beginning of the toolkit for you to build a base level of knowledge and understanding about what those terms mean and how to use them with the queer and trans seniors you might support. That's a really great place to start if all of this stuff is very new to you. We also dove into the literature and evidence. So we provide an overview of current research with 2S LGBTQI+ seniors, including their unique needs, challenges, and experiences related to aging in long-term care, healthcare, retirement home care, and social support settings. And as Rayanne mentioned, we do actually have a section as part of this piece of the toolkit that focuses specifically on elder abuse against queer and trans seniors. And so with that, we included as much evidence and literature as we could, recognizing, of course, that in Canada there is a pressing and urgent need for more research in this area. There's quite a dearth in the literature right now, but we drew on what we could to emphasize some of the unique risk factors and contextual factors that can contribute to higher rates of abuse against queer and trans seniors, and also to highlight some of the unique barriers they may face in seeking support for elder abuse. Things like social isolation, internalized stigma, fear of discrimination and ridicule in care and support settings. All of these things can inhibit a survivor of abuse from seeking the supports that they need. And we wanted to make sure to highlight those things in the toolkit. We also, of course, reference out to a number of incredible resources that exist and focus more specifically on elder abuse against queer and trans seniors. So that module that Rayanne referenced earlier in the presentation today is definitely referenced. We also have some resources from EGAL and a series of informative video learning modules from Simon Fraser University for you to build more knowledge, awareness, and skills in responding to elder abuse against queer and trans seniors. But there's lots of other stuff in that kind of mini literature review. We focus on, unique considerations around aging with HIV and AIDS. We also talk about unique considerations around palliative and end-of-life care with queer and trans seniors. So that's a really great place to go to get a sense of or an overview of some of the unique challenges of these communities as they're borne out in the scientific literature. And this section concludes by introducing the concept of 2S LGBTQI+ allyship, and outlines some concrete steps that you can take to practice being an ally to queer and trans seniors who you might serve or support. And one of the key pieces of this section that we've really focused on is how to have those kind of challenging conversations with our colleagues or communities where someone might say or do something that inadvertently sometimes, often inadvertently, causes harm or offense to queer or trans seniors. How do you then respond to that? How do you call that person into a conversation and support their learning and growth without alienating them? We've really unpacked a lot of these important nuances to equip you with the knowledge and skills you need to be providing the best support possible to queer and trans seniors. And with respect to the language and terminology section, I swore this wouldn't be an educational session, but I do need to reflect this because it's really important. We developed this section from an understanding that the words we use to describe ourselves and others matter. They matter because they help folks feel seen and understood and visible. And so throughout this toolkit, you will see the initialism or acronym 2SLGBTQI+, to refer broadly to diverse and expanding communities of gender and sexual minority seniors. And as you can see, that initialism stands for two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and then the plus at the end reflects other gender and sexually diverse communities, pansexual, asexual, demisexual, lots of others to include in there. You may notice that earlier versions of this toolkit used a different acronym, LGBTQ2S, and you've likely seen that acronym or a variation of it elsewhere. It's really important to flag that we as a group decided to adopt and use 2SLGBTQI+ following close consultation with our working group. This new initialism not only acknowledges and sheds light on the experiences of intersex communities who have their own histories and unique challenges related to aging, but you'll also see that we moved the 2S for two-spirit from the end of the initialism or acronym to the beginning. And that is a modest but significant step in centering the lived experiences of two-spirit people and honoring Indigenous communities who existed on these lands long before others and long before the kind of colonial imposition of these rigid words and categories around gender and sexual orientation. So words matter, language matters. This toolkit is developed around that idea, and that's why you'll see this initialism reflected throughout the toolkit. It's also one we've adopted formally as a division and as a city, and I would encourage folks on this call to be using this, this initialism moving forward if you are not already. Now I'd like to provide an overview of our second section, which is called Building Organizational Capacity. This section focuses on organizational level approaches to promote inclusion and address systemic barriers affecting queer and trans seniors. Again, in terms of learning objectives specifically, this section is going to identify and describe 10 concrete recommendations that your organization can take to create respectful, inclusive, and affirming spaces for queer and trans seniors. And then it's also going to provide practical examples
Sorry, Rayanne, you're on mute.
I think Joseph's internet was unstable and I think he's trying to reconnect. Please bear with us for a second.
Apologies, everyone. So we are back after a momentary internet outage. Apologies, everyone. So I'm now wanting to move ahead with the second section of our toolkit called Building Organizational Capacity. As I mentioned, this section focuses on organizational level approaches to promote inclusion and address some of the systemic barriers affecting queer and trans seniors. So in terms of learning objectives, specifically, this section is going to identify and describe 10 concrete recommendations for organizations to create more respectful, inclusive, and affirming spaces. And we want to set you up for success. So the second objective here is to provide you with practical examples and resources to accompany each one of those recommendations and encourage you and your staff to lead or support organizational change efforts, to make changes with the tools you have and create spaces that are, again, more welcoming and affirming for queer and trans seniors. So what does that look like? Here is our new model called the Cycle of Respectful, Inclusive, and Affirming Care. This is what we really like to call the meat of the toolkit. And it's based on the idea that this process is exactly that. It's cyclical and it's iterative. So earlier versions of the toolkit, if you're familiar with them, had a similar model, but it looked more like a ladder or a road. So there were these 10 steps and you would work through them in sequence. And once you got to step 10, you would check a box and pat yourself on the back and say, all right, we're done. We've solved all the problems in our organization and we are now providing affirming and inclusive care for queer and trans seniors. But we know that that's not how things work out in the real world. We know that these processes are messy, they are iterative, and they are ongoing. There really isn't a decisive start or end point because the work, the change that is necessary for 2S LGBTQI+ inclusion has to be consistent and ongoing, and it has to be responsive to the evolving needs of queer and trans senior communities. And so the 10 recommendations in this cycle offer suggestions that your organization can adopt to improve supports for queer and trans seniors. They do not necessarily need to be completed in any particular order. And depending on where your organization is on its journey, they can be started, restarted, or revisited at any time. And unfortunately, we don't have time to go into each one of these recommendations in great depth today because we're just providing an overview. But I will highlight a few that I think are pretty neat, and I'll use the annotate tool here if I can. The first one on this slide is called Open Up. This is all about modifying or improving your organization's policies, procedures, and physical environments to be more queer and trans inclusive. So does your anti-harassment and discrimination policy recognize queer and trans communities as protected individuals? Does it name homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia as explicitly prohibited in your organization? When we think about the long-term care or retirement setting, are our rooming policies inclusive? Are trans and gender non-conforming residents being placed in rooms that are affirming of their gender identities? Are our visiting policies queer and trans inclusive? This was especially important during the pandemic when folks were really having restricted access. And often access to visiting residents in long-term care or retirement settings were restricted to members of biological family or legal relatives. And we know that queer and trans seniors are less likely to have those kinds of familial connections and are more likely to derive support from members of chosen or found families. So are we making sure in long-term care and retirement or congregate living settings that visitation rights are extended to the same extent to members of chosen family and community and friends and significant others? In terms of procedures, are we creating a space in our organizations when we do intake and assessment where queer and trans seniors feel safe and comfortable enough to disclose who they are, what their gender or identity is, what their sexual orientation is, what their gender expression is? These are folks who may be more reluctant to talk about these aspects of self due to past negative experiences in care settings. So how are you making sure that intake and assessment is safe and welcoming, and collecting as much data as you can so as to provide the best care possible? In terms of the physical environments in our organizations, are there visual indicators, signs, and symbols that someone could look at and say, this is a space that is welcoming and inclusive for me? Are your washrooms gender neutral and single stall? Are there flags and signs and posters that let queer and trans communities know that this is a space that is welcoming and safe for them? Another recommendation I want to touch on this afternoon is called Hit the Books. This is all about how to effectively promote 2S LGBTQI+ education with your staff, and links out actually to a whole bunch of other resources and training modules for your staff and care partners to hone their skills. So the toolkit is a great resource, but it's also just a foundation. If you want to specialize or drill down into other topics like aging with HIV and AIDS, end of life care, palliative care, other unique considerations around queer and trans communities and aging, this part of the toolkit will direct you to other resources to tailor that kind of education. The last one I want to touch on this afternoon is called Be Accountable, and this is a personal favorite of mine. This recommendation is all about evaluating your systems and processes for 2S LGBTQI+ inclusion. So this section concludes actually with a comprehensive and really kind of detail-oriented evaluation framework that your organization can use to track progress and outcomes when it comes to the work you're doing to better support and include queer and trans seniors. And you can look through and flip through, and there will be milestones and deliverables and outputs and things that you can check off and see where your assets are, what you're doing really well, where your gaps are, areas for improvement, and also a space for you to plan and think about next steps to keep this work and momentum going. I'm going to now erase my annotations. Sorry, everyone. There we go. So what I want to touch on in conclusion here is that there are features that we've included throughout the toolkit to enhance your learning. And so you'll see these pieces woven throughout, and I really encourage you to check them out and highlight them as you're interacting with the resource. The first is called Working Group Guidance. This is concrete advice from members of our working group that's really meant to enhance your application of toolkit content in practice. So you can really hear the voices of our lived experience advisors and working group members coming through in this guidance. And I really hope you turn to it when interacting with the toolkit. Again, many external resources included throughout the toolkit. We do not want this to be the only thing you're looking at when attempting to better support queer and trans seniors. It's a great starting point, but there are lots of other areas and avenues you can explore to enhance your own learning. Insights, these are our direct quotes from queer and trans long-term care residents, staff, and family members. They provide a really meaningful and kind of vital and personal dimension to the learning. It can be hard to imagine how all of this stuff impacts folks day to day from a lived experience perspective when you're just reading about it. So we wanted to provide those firsthand accounts as well. And last but not least, real world models and examples of organizations who are really walking the talk and leading the charge when it comes to delivering respectful, inclusive, and affirming care. And there are models in there that you may wish to replicate in your own organizations or in your provision of care to members of these communities. And just to end off here, looking ahead, the release of this toolkit is just the first of many steps that the city is taking to create truly inclusive long-term care homes and senior services for queer and trans communities. Undoubtedly, it provides an important foundation, but we know that that process is ongoing, and there's always room for learning and unlearning and growth and improvement. So we've undertaken a pretty comprehensive Pride in Education campaign to keep this momentum going and keep pushing towards respectful, inclusive, and affirming care. And pieces of that include a mandatory video learning module called Understanding Gender and Sexual Orientation that's being delivered to all staff. Information sessions, much like this one, that we are delivering internally to all of our long-term care homes and to a variety of external partners and community agencies within and beyond the City of Toronto. We are also partnering with the 519 Toronto and Senior Pride Network on a series of interactive pilot workshops. Those are being funded by the New Horizons program for seniors at the federal government. And they will really lift the toolkit content off the page, engage our staff in critical dialogue about 2S LGBTQI+ inclusion. And what we love about these workshops is that they're actually being co-designed and co-facilitated by lived experience advisors and community educators. So queer and trans seniors will have an opportunity to share their lived experiences and provide education and training directly to our staff. Our working group members and other partners who I mentioned at the beginning will remain involved and engaged in all of this to ensure that any steps we are taking with the toolkit are driven by their voices and their interests. And the last thing I'll say is that, this resource has a long history. Once again, this is the third iteration of it, and we hope it can be something of a living document. So who's to say in a couple more years, in about, 2025, we don't look at this resource again and say, it's time once more to bring community into the fold, to revitalize this resource and modernize it. And the hope there is that we can continue to push it forward and ensure that we are doing our best to provide the best care possible to us LGBTQI+ seniors now and in the future. So I will end off there. Apologies sincerely once again for the technical difficulties, but I'm so thrilled to have been able to present to you all today and happy to take any questions or discussion we have time for.
Thank you, Joseph. So we do have one question that did come up, and I do encourage anyone, if you have questions, you can either put it in the chat box or the question and answer session. So the question is, when it comes to intake, is it appropriate to ask seniors their gender and orientation, or should we be striving to create an environment where they feel safe enough to disclose that information?
That is such a good question. And I don't have a clear-cut answer because I really think it depends on the individual that you are working with. So the approach we advocate for taking in the toolkit is to give folks the opportunity to identify themselves. So if you have standard intake forms or surveys that people fill out, it's important to include on those documents categories where you collect gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation, because not collecting those things is a form of erasure and can make folks apprehensive about identifying themselves. That said, the initial intake or assessment that you're doing with a client or long-term care resident or service user might not be the opportune moment to come in really, really hot and say, I need to know this about you. Can you disclose this information? As I mentioned, queer and trans people generally, and queer and trans seniors specifically, often withhold that information due to past negative experiences in care settings or anticipated experiences of stigma and discrimination. And so one of the things that we actually talked about with the working group and with our external advisors as well is that intake and assessment doesn't have to be a one-time discrete process. So if you're working with someone who is comfortable sharing that stuff right at the outset, by all means, collect that information, but recognize as well that as you work with an individual client or service user and you build trust and rapport with them, their comfort will increase, and there will come a time down the line where they may feel more safe sharing that stuff with you. But the goal is to collect it, because we know that the more you know about your clients and about your service users, the better able you are to support their individual needs.
That's a great question. I know that that did come up in our discussion when we were doing the review about intake forms and how often people do that, and what questions, what to put on intake forms. So that information is in the toolkit, which will be helpful for people. We do have another question just in terms of the outreach for your work that you're doing. There's a couple people just asked, so Toronto is always the leader in this work. Has there been any inquiries from other regions? And would folks from other groups be willing to connect with the GTA long-term care homes or agencies?
Yes and yes. There has certainly been a swell of interest in this resource, not only from agencies and partners in Toronto, but across the province and nationally as well. So, we've been delivering sessions, again, to anyone who may be supporting queer and trans seniors across the continuum of support. So home care providers, healthcare providers, social service and community-based agencies. Content in the toolkit is highly relevant to City of Toronto agencies, and a lot of the data and evidence we include in the toolkit is Toronto-based. That said, it's still very much a resource that is relevant to folks working with queer and trans seniors anywhere at any time. And so if you are interested in hosting a similar session like this with other partners, wherever you are, we would be happy to do that and collaborate on that with you.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other questions, but I'll give people another couple minutes. I'm just going to also share a couple other resources that they're there. You've already mentioned just a couple other provincial supports in the community. So you mentioned the 519. organization within Toronto. They have many senior programs and outreach, are very active in the community. And also the Senior Pride Network of Toronto, but I know there's other Pride networks. I know in Ottawa and Windsor and throughout other parts of Ontario. So people can connect locally or within Toronto, depending on where the person resides. There's also the Rainbow Health Ontario, which provides information and support around health issues, which again is a province-wide organization that you can access further information. There's, at the side there, there's a little image from the Senior Pride Network, all the resources that they provide, and it does break it down in terms of Toronto and outside internal or international and national. So have a look, because I know that they have lots of information. There has been tremendous amount of work also being done in the 2S LGBTQI community in terms of studies, just to get a better idea of the supports and information that needs to be out there. And I'm sure you're involved in many of those, Joseph. But EGAL is very involved in that work, and I know the National Institute on Aging as well. And we've worked with EGAL on a number of projects, including this elder abuse and financial community conversations that we had. And they're doing some work around working with older adults and caregivers within the community. So have a look at some of that research. And I know sometimes their projects are seeking volunteers within the community to help support their work. So again, I just put some briefs, reports in our newsletters that we put out monthly. We include information on tools and supports within the 2S LGBTQI+ community as well. So I know our last newsletter did highlight some of these initiatives. And just lastly, just if you're looking for outreach services and you are in a situation that you could be encountering, your safety is at risk, or you're worried about someone, you can call the local police services or Crime Stoppers for support. And I see there's a couple other questions that we'll get to. Is there a promotional video, Joseph, for the toolkit? Or I think that's in the works. I'm not sure. I think I read that somewhere.
Yeah, so we are working very hard to launch this video in time for October 1st, which is International Day of Older Persons, and an important day and reminder that as we work to better support older adults globally and locally and in our communities, that queer and trans seniors must be a part of our efforts and cannot continue to be overlooked. And so our video features one-on-one interviews with queer and trans seniors and long-term care residents to bring awareness to their histories and experiences, and to promote the toolkit as a resource you can use to better address those needs and challenges. So I will be very eager to share that video with everyone once it is ready. I see a question as well about contacting me. The best way to do that is through the central email for the senior services team at the City of Toronto. So that is seniors@toronto.ca. And particularly if you'd like to request an information session for your organization or a community partner, we have some admin support to help go through those and organize and coordinate them. So that's the best way to get in touch. And if you have any other questions about the toolkit or anything else about better supporting queer and trans seniors, feel free to reach out at any time.
Great, thank you. I was just trying to find the website to post. Oh, you already did it. You're already ahead of me. Okay, so I think those are the last. And that's it, because we have our questions answered. So I know that we're at 2 o'clock, just right on time. Thank you so much, Joseph, for sharing this valuable information on this new toolkit with our participants. We will be posting it for others who weren't able to join us today onto our website. And also acknowledge our ASL interpreters today for their support to get the information as well. So, and for you, everybody who joined us today, thank you. So thank you again, and everyone enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, ASL interpreters. And sorry again for the tech glitch. Hope the recording comes out okay. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.